I've had a bit of an exciting week, so I thought I would just put on the camera and just talk a little bit about it. I haven't had the opportunity over the last couple of years to talk about Emberheart, even though I knew that it was coming up. So Emberheart is a big new release. It was launched for pre-order a couple of days ago by Mindclash, the publisher, and suddenly it's being shared everywhere, right? There's videos from Rado runs through, and Watch It Played, loads of videos, previews and playthroughs and how to play videos, and loads of really, really nice comments about it. I mean, Rado's saying better than Lords of Waterdeep, and there's going to make lots of top 10 lists, and I've seen lots of other comments from other content creators saying they're really loving the game. So it's been really, really gratifying to see this. I've not had a response like this to my previous games. As successful as some of them have been, moderately successful, they haven't been number one on the Board Game Geek hotness, which is what I found this morning for Emberheart. So that's really, really exciting. So what is Emberheart? Let me start there, and then we'll go back to the beginning and I'll talk to you through the sort of 10 years really of development of this game. So Emberheart is a worker placement game, but it's a worker placement game with a twist in that you place your workers onto different locations and you have to decide how many workers to send there. And there's a kind of bidding element to it, because if other players place more workers, they might get the rewards that you wanted, because ultimately the rewards are going to be handed out in order of the number of workers that you've placed. And another important thing is that the workers that you place, they're not all coming back to you. Some of them will, the experts, but some of them, the grunts, they're single use workers, and they disappear. Okay, it's got this incredible story of a land that's surrounded by dragons, living in peace, humans and dragons living together, and so on. But poachers invading this land, and you've now got to gather up the dragons and bring them into sanctuaries and ride the dragons to fight off the poachers. So you're forming connections between the heroes and the dragons, joining them together, which empowers those heroes to use their abilities. It's fantastic, and it's beautifully illustrated by Andrew Bosley, and I'll come back to that point. Andrew Bosley, the illustrator behind Everdell. So let's rewind back to about 2014, when Rob Fisher and I set up a playtesting group in Cardiff, which would meet weekly, and we met weekly for years and years and years. It's become a little more sporadic these days, as we've both got very, very busy. But for years and years and years, meeting every single week and designing games. Now, Rob had previously designed an abstract strategy game called Monkey Dash, which he took to Essen and sold. I can't remember how many copies he handcrafted, but it had a little bit of experience with going to Essen and things like this. I hadn't, right? I was completely fresh in those days. But I was designing a lot of games, and Rob was giving me a lot of feedback, and I was giving him feedback in his games, and we found that we gelled really, really well. So Rob had this early stages of an idea, and we decided this would be the game that we would work on, the initial game we would work on. And that's the game that went on to become Emberheart. It was a dice game at that point, a dice placement game, but it was about dragons. And the core concept was still there, that when you're dealing with dragons, it's dangerous, right? Even if you're trying to look after the dragons. We had really comical, silly themes in there, like cutting the dragon's toenails and giving them a bath and reading them bedtime stories and things. But sometimes when you sent your workers out to do these things, your workers wouldn't come back. In this version of the game, the workers were dice, and each dragon had a sort of total that you would need to roll in order to achieve it. So a particularly difficult task would be a 6. And if you rolled a 6, you achieved the task. If you didn't roll a 6, your worker would die and it would be removed from you. Okay, so this was the basic sort of premise of these disposable workers, I suppose. And that remains there in the game now, although there are no dice and there's no randomness or anything like that. But this idea that some of your workers do not come back, others come back to you time and time again. Throughout the development of the game, it of course became more and more complex. We started to have multiple different currencies. At one point there was money involved, there was beer as a currency, there was fish as a currency, there were all sorts of other layers and complications in it. Alongside the workers. But the theme was really central to everything right from the very, very beginning. So Rob really had this concept of a very, I I suppose it's quite a British sort of sensibility, really, this idea of Monty Python and Terry Pratchett, this sort of grotesque, satirical sort of theme. So it was really quite dark and brutal at times, this game. A lot of it was about almost a sort of commentary on capitalism and so on. It got quite high convoluted, right? But it was, if you think of like Squid Game, right, with those VIPs sitting there, these sort of grotesque characters that are exploitative and so on. We had a lot of that in the game, right? So a lot of actions that you were taking were exploiting workers, exploiting the dragons and so on, with these grotesque characters. And a lot of the game was built around shame, right? You could do very noble actions, but you could also do quite shameful actions which would advance you on a track. This is, again, a long way from where Emberheart ended up. But it was quite an amusing game at times, but there was a lot of randomness in it. When your workers died, right, when these dice died, when they failed to achieve their mission, they would end up in a graveyard, okay? And then if you sent your workers to a graveyard, you would start to get, like, fate would give you bonuses that would allow you to mitigate your dice rolls later. So we had quite a sophisticated system of luck mitigation and so on. Anyway, over numerous playtests, we got to the point where I was happy to show this to publishers, and so I started pitching the game to some publishers in 2017, and I got a lot of really good feedback, actually, all those years ago, but publishers were concerned about the amount of randomness in the game, and they were asking me to mitigate that more, to pull back on that more. And so I came away from all those pitches feeling sort of a bit invigorated because people were keen, but not quite knowing what to do. And I thought, well, what happens if we remove all of that randomness altogether? A bit of a kill your darlings sort of situation here, really. Let's strip out the thing which was supposed to be the absolute core of the game and see if it still holds up with the scaffold that we'd built around that system. And so that's where I started to introduce this system of tokens which represented your workers, some of them being sort of expendable single-use workers, which have become the grunts in Emberheart, and some of them being workers that could come back to you time and again, but they're a little bit harder to get. And these are the experts. And in Emberheart, these workers can only go to certain locations, whereas your grunts, your single-use workers, can go anywhere. Okay. So that was the starting point. It turned out this worked really quite well. We then started to realise that, it was starting to become a game that was more about the workers than it was about the dragons. And so we felt that a game like this really, really needed to be all about the dragons. We needed loads and loads of dragons in the game. And so where previously we'd had, 3 different cards that you could take from any individual location, I decided we needed to have one location where there were multiple layers, where you could take multiple dragons on a single turn to build them into your collection. So you built up more and more dragons throughout the game. So we ended up with this wilderness, which has now become the mountain, where you start claiming dragons on the first row. Some of your workers will then disappear, but then you progress to the second row with your remaining workers, and you can claim another dragon, and then you might even be able to progress to a third row, but you're losing workers at each stage because this is a dangerous territory to be in. Going back to when I was pitching in 2017, that initial version of the game, I found some publishers were balking a little bit at this graveyard idea. And they would say things to me like, oh, could we maybe change it into a hospital? Just like simple thematic, just to soften the theme a little bit and so on. Yeah, but we've still got that sort of concept of these workers which disappear. We might not refer to them as actually dying as such. They're sort of temp workers, I suppose, at this point. But certainly there are dragons that are dangerous. And we do see workers constantly disappear. At the end of the round, we have a raid by the poachers where you're going to lose some of your workers of certain types, depending on what you have of other things. So there's still a fairly brutal element to it. Your workers keep disappearing and you keep having to recoup them and gather new workers to send them out because this is a dangerous place. I always thought it was amusing that publishers would kind of balk at this idea because I mean, if you look at How to Train Your Dragon, which is a children's cartoon film, right? And obviously a big live action film recently. But even in the original cartoon, this was brutal, right? There was you might not see it that much on screen, but they were constantly talking about how many people die at the hands of these dragons. And you've got characters walking around with peg legs and missing arms and things like this. It's all there in this children's cartoon. How to Train Your Dragon wasn't a major influence, although it's a very similar story. It wasn't a major influence on Emberheart as it eventually turned out, but it was there in the back of my mind. I knew that it was similar, right? We didn't directly reference How to Train Your Dragon, but I knew they were similar sort of stories. So anyway, we got to the point where, of course, the pandemic hit. The game was pretty much sort of done, but I didn't quite know what to do with it or who to show it to. So we just tinkered and tinkered and tinkered and played over years. Numerous different play tests, kept changing bits up thematically, mechanically, until eventually in 2023, I took the new version to Essen, almost in its current form, although there have been quite a few developments by the publisher Mindclash. And I took it to Essen, I showed it to a lot of different publishers. And it got, I would say, the best response out of any of my games ever, really, from publishers. There were lots of publishers interested. Lots of them took away prototypes. I ended up with multiple offers of publication, all around a similar time, thankfully, because it meant that I could choose, really, which publisher I wanted to go with. And Mindclash was just the obvious fit, right? They just understood it from those very first meetings. They were enthusiastic, they were professional, and they understood it. But Mindclash make massive, complex games, right? Rob Fisher and I, we don't make massive, complex games. We make pretty simple games. For us, our game this was the biggest game, the most complex game we'd ever made. But for Mindclash, this was super simple, super accessible. They were already, from that very first meeting, talking about, we might have to add a few more layers to this to make it a little bit more complex. I'm thinking this is the most complex thing I've ever created. But they wanted to add more complexity to it to get it to the point where it is now, which is Gateway Plus, we're describing it as, I suppose. So this isn't Ticket to Ride, but I guess we're somewhere in that sort of Everdell sort of territory, to bring it back to Andrew Bosley. So we got a fantastic offer from Mindclash, obviously a company which makes big games and has a hugely dedicated following. So that was really appealing to us as well. Then we kind of left it in their hands for a while. This was a time where Rob and I both, I won't go into our own personal lives, but we both had quite difficult stuff going on, okay? And we didn't have the time to commit to loads and loads and loads of development on the game. So we said to Mindclash, we were happy for them to do development work and let us know what's going on, keep us informed, but we weren't looking to be hugely hands-on at that stage. So it was some time before we got the big update, which was that the game was going to be called Emberheart. And then they showed us the box and they told us that Andrew Bosley was the artist. Now, if you have seen my channel, if you've been watching it over the years, you know that Everdell is my favourite game. I love Everdell. I love Andrew Bosley's artwork. That's one of the big draws to the game. This artwork behind me on the wall here is by Andrew Bosley. Okay, this artwork was provided to me by Launch Tabletop when they were sponsoring some of my videos. But yeah, I wanted the Andrew Bosley prints on the wall. I love his artwork, and so when they told me Andrew Bosley was doing it, I was just delighted. I was so pleased, and of course, then over the months, and we start to see more and more images, and we just start to see how beautiful this is. And they've fleshed out the story. Some elements of the game have changed, so particularly, they've introduced this idea of sanctuaries that we didn't have, which you can connect up with the dragons. It's just it's just a lovely story. It's just become this lovely story. And it's one of the things that Rado pointed out in his video about the fact that, you know, a lot of games around dragons and monsters is about catching them and making them fight with each other and so on. And there have been elements of that in earlier prototypes, but we always wanted the story to be a bit more than that. We wanted this to be about, you know, a society and to have some sort of commentary on it. And okay, now Emberheart, there's nothing political about it whatsoever in the way that maybe our prototypes once were. But it does have this lovely ecological sort of story of rescuing these beautiful animals and saving them from poachers and putting them into these beautiful landscapes. And of course, Andrew Bosley's artwork has just lifted that so much. Okay, so that's kind of where we've got to, this incredible game. And I don't have a copy of it to show you. I haven't played it in its finished form right now. I'm just waiting for my copy to arrive. Hopefully I should get one soon and be able to unbox it and show you me sort of seeing the game for the first time. But I mean, obviously I've gone over and over the rules and now these how to play videos and so on, and watching people playing it. Yeah, just an incredible experience, and delighted to find that it's #1 on the Board Game Geek hotness. Long may it continue. So what happens next? Well, Essenspiel, I suppose. It's a pre-order period. This is a slightly unusual thing. Mindclash have chosen to run a pre-order, I suppose following a model similar to what Stonemaier Games does with their Wingspan and you know, all of their games these days. They don't go through Kickstarter, they go through this period where they're announced and you can pre-order it, and then relatively soon after that you can buy it at retail. So the big launch will be at Essenspiel, and then hopefully of course there'll be a big launch again at UK Games Expo next spring. I'm no stranger to Essenspiel. I go there practically every year, so I'm going to love being there and meeting people at the booth and hopefully doing some interviews and those sorts of things. And then I suppose we see where the game goes from there, and whether there's any more work to do on it, whether there's any expansion material or anything like that that's required. This is all kind of up in the air. But yeah, it's just exciting, and it comes at the end of a really good week, really, where I published my next book, Adam in Wales Legacy, this big thick book all about the most influential games throughout history and taking design lessons from them. So this is a book for people who are interested in the history of games, but also people who are designers themselves. And I've had a couple of really nice emails from other publishers about ongoing projects and potential projects and things like that. It's just been a good week, and I just wanted to come on here and speak to you about it. And hopefully soon I'm going to be able to show you a physical copy of the game. Maybe I'll get Rob Fisher into one of these videos and we'll have a little chat together about our development of the game as well. So yeah, anyway, thanks for listening to me just ramble on. But I'm excited. I hope you are too. And I'll see you on the next video. All the best.